I got to ask you about Justice Capitalist.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure you chose to have that written on your jacket tonight. What does it mean?
Thanks a lot for having me, and it's such a delight to see everyone here today. Justice capitalism is essentially a construct that believes in doing well and doing good is by no means mutually exclusive. We live in a construct today with the standard capitalist structure we operate in, whereby you have winners and losers. And I've always believed, due to my upbringing, that you can always isolate and create win-win outcomes. And that's what justice capitalism is all about.
Thank you for that ringtone, just to remind everyone else to turn on their phones to silent. We're so pleased that you are here with your phones. We want you sharing this story. We want you on whatever form of social media you love to enjoy to help spread Wemimo's story, because it is a fascinating one. And I've been so lucky to sort of track it a little bit. Bloomberg's been so lucky to track it because you were part of our own New Economy Forum catalysts. You were singled out as one of the key companies to watch as you help make the world a better place. You endeavor with that with Justice Capitalism and strong enough on that to have it emblazoned on your jacket. But you don't become a unicorn overnight. And in fact, you didn't just have one no or two no's when you were out there trying to raise funding with this incredible idea, which we're going to dig into in a moment. But you had 326 no's. Wow. Am I right?
Spot on. We keep scores.
Yeah. What? Who was the 327?
Acumen America. It's this impact-based venture fund that really believes on this idea of doing well and doing good is not mutually exclusive. Yeah. Ran by Jacqueline Novogratz. And she really just believed, from my experience when we met, that this company could have a profound impact in the lives of many. And they took that bet, and we've done quite well for them.
Okay, so tell us what the very beating heart of the company is about. It's about gaining access to real estate for people who before left out of that equation. What seeded the idea for Esusu?
So when I think about Esusu, I have to go down memory lane. I grew up in the slums of Lagos, Nigeria. I lost my dad at the age of 2, and I was raised by my mother and 2 very feisty sisters. And one thing my mother fundamentally believed in was just the importance of education. She afforded my school fees to one of the finest high schools in the land, despite having less than an high school degree herself. She worked at the post office for 21 years and then spent 60% of her salary to afford me the best education anyone can ask for. So really inspired by that education, I really wanted to come to this magical place called America. I immigrated from 80-degree weather in Lagos to negative 22 degrees in Minnesota. It was a character building experience, and now, you know, I love deer hunting and ice fishing. And
with the right outfit.
Right, and my New York friends think I'm weird, but you know, during that transition, something important happened, Caroline. My mother and I did not have a credit score. We walked into one of the biggest financial institutions in Minneapolis to borrow money, and were turned away and had to go borrow money at over 400% interest rate. Wow. In addition to that, my mother sold my dad's wedding ring. We borrowed money from church members, and that's how we got started in the United States. So really inspired by that experience, we started Esusu on 3 core premises. No matter where you come from, the color of your skin, and particularly your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in the wealthiest nation the world has ever seen.
So tell us what you saw. It wasn't just about the credit that you could borrow in terms of financing yourself through education. You then clearly realized that just building wealth was so hard.
Absolutely.
So why did you take on the world of sort of loans through rental? How did you start to see, okay, look, people are paying, they're paying regularly, and this is something that is left out at the moment in terms of credit scoring?
Absolutely. So our vision at Esusu is to leverage data to bridge the racial wealth gap. There are over 110 million Americans that rent. When you pay your mortgage today, that data is factored into your credit score. When you pay your rent, predominantly low to medium income people, that data isn't factored. And today, less than 10% of that data is factored into consumers' credit profile. So we saw that opportunity and say, look, let's give credit where credit is due. Yes. When you pay your mortgage, you get that. And when you pay your rent, you should get that access also. And that's the opportunity we were able to establish. And rent reporting is the only medium where you can go back 24 months and retroactively report rental data. And what does that mean? It might seem very, very simple, but it's the difference of having a subprime credit score, whereby you might not have access to financial products like my mother and I, or getting a car note where you can drive to work and give your kid a better life. So that's the real impact of what we do. That 3 digits financial identity called your credit score can either determine if you're going to work at the gas station, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, or have the opportunity to have my experience overcome and run $1 billion business.
That overcoming is amazing. The fact that your mother predominantly set out there and was like, there is nothing that's going to stand in my children's way in terms of education. You then went on to say there's nothing that's stand in my way to get from Lagos over to the United States. How did you then start to develop the idea, okay, I need to build partnerships though now. To help other people overcome these barriers, I've got to get into bed with Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae. How do you build those sorts of relationships?
You know, I've always believed on this idea of one-to-many sort of go-to-market approach. When we started Esusu was a savings business. We started on this premise that how can we get a group of people to save as a collective? Well, we got a simple feedback. We don't get paid enough, so we can't save as much as we need to. And when we're running the business, it became very clear. Running a direct-to-consumer business is incredibly expensive. So we took liberty to say, how do we partner with institutions? This country we reside in, the United States, was built on cheap wealth, cheap debt. And if you think about the legacy of slavery, think about the legacy of Jim Crow, you think about the discrimination with redlining, right? And you think about all the systematic policies that have let Black people and other people of color left behind in this country. It's quite dire, but we're not interested in the rhetoric. We're interested in the record. So our idea was, how do we work with government, the Federal Housing Finance Agency? How do we work with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and say, look, you have a duty to serve.
Yes.
You have a duty to provide access to housing, but without a credit score, that American dream is unattainable. And we partnered with them. We're able to give folks that opportunity to establish their credit score and hopefully achieve that American dream one day of getting a home, a picket fence, and maybe a dog, a little baby if you choose to.
It's powerful. That message is powerful. Who did you find to go into and deliver that sort of powerful message to? Was it through your network to say, look, please connect me with the right person? Was it that you started to see the data, started to be able to see that the time is now that they're willing to listen?
Yeah, so the relationship for us was based on, we actually partnered with mortgage lenders. A key one in this case is Berkadia. It's this institution which is sort of a partnership of the Jefferies Group and then Berkshire Hathaway. They saw promise in what we were doing and introduced us to Freddie Mac. And Freddie Mac had an innovation center. They gave us that shot and said, look, we're going to run a pilot and let's see what you can actually do. It took us 24 months. It took us 36 months of working with the consumer rating agencies. But you know what? My mother always says, you know, there's always a rainbow after the storm. And when you hang around the barbershop, sooner or later you're going to get a haircut. We stuck in there, and you know, we're able to work with these institutions, and then Fannie Mae followed. So the perseverance has always been our theme ever since.
I mean, funny enough, you know, there's no such thing as an overnight success. It feels that way with you. You burst onto the scene, you had suddenly all these partnerships with Goldman Sachs, everyone wanting to support you, to be seen next to you, but you were there not only just building Esusu, but you'd built other previous companies and not-for-profits before, right?
Correct. So Esusu is my third rodeo as an entrepreneur. I started with a clean water business at the age of 17 because I almost lost my life to typhoid in Nigeria. And I really wanted to make an impact and say, look, no kid should have to go to school or no kid should have to die by not having access to clean water. And we're able to build affordable water infrastructure for over 250,000 people around the world.
Wow.
And while I was in New York University, I was working with a professor, Bert Novak, and the idea was simple. How do we map international development finance across the African continent? There have been trillions of dollars deployed. And the hypothesis was, let's map that data. That company was acquired in 2015, and then Esusu is the third radio.
So you worked alongside your professor for your second one? Or?
Yes. So I worked alongside Beth Novak. She was actually the interim chief technology officer for President Obama's administration, and she was really passionate about this idea of open government, right? So we the people, during President Obama's administration, she was one of the orchestrators of that idea. So how do we capture open machine-readable data? And that's exactly what translated to Esusu. How do you capture clean, reliable, transformative rental data and pipe it into the consumer rating agencies? So there are through lines, and you're right, there's no such thing as an overnight success.
But you make things happen, and I want to understand what drives that. Was that, you know, the fact that you'd had this incredible education, you didn't want to waste it, and you wanted to come to the US, and then it was just like, well, why not have these ideas? Why not ask professors to help me launch certain creatives and solve problems? What is it, do you think, makes your dreams become a reality when others don't make that happen?
You know, I grew up in the slums. I've had family members that said I won't amount to anything in my life. I don't have anything to fall back on. I can only fall forward. So I take ridiculous risk because my mother isn't expecting me to be the next investment banker. My mother isn't expecting me to be a doctor, right? I can do whatever I want. I can take chances. And that's really what helped me. I just plow forward. There'll be a lot of failures. There are a lot of failures people don't talk about. One glaring one was my co-founder and I, we closed our first contract with Esusu, a $20,000 contract. It was with the University of Minnesota, my alma mater. And when we closed that contract, we were $100,000 in credit card debt. And you know how credit card debts compound. So we couldn't afford an hotel room. So our idea was, we loved Denny's. It was this diner. And we went to Fargo, North Dakota. So the idea was just to walk all night, type our lives away like we usually do. But unfortunately, we're not perpetual motion machines. So we dozed off. And the restaurant manager, a very gentleman, came around 2:30 a.m. in the morning and said, "Gentlemen, you have to leave." And we understood. So we were kicked out of a Denny's while trying to raise capital, while we had over $100,000 combined in credit card debts. But that didn't stop us because we know ultimately what we are chasing. And no one expected anything from us. And the kind words of Alan Turing, it is those that you don't expect anything of that do things you can't imagine.
Well said. You worked that you had succeeded, I'm sure, in your mum's mind's eye, in your family's mind's eye, when you landed a job at, was it E&Y, and you were a successful consultant doing M&A. Why was that not success for you?
You know, my PwC peers will be disappointed. No, you know, when I was leaving PricewaterhouseCoopers, you have to understand, this woman sacrificed everything. 60% of her salary, working at the post office. And you have this job at Goldman Sachs, and you know, one of the folks that helped me get my job at PricewaterhouseCoopers is actually here today, Matt Garnett at the back. And you know, I went to my mom and I said, "Look, I'm leaving PricewaterhouseCoopers, which means I can't pay your rent anymore." My mother cried. She said, "I thought we made it." And it was really, really hard. It was a tough conversation. You sacrificed everything, and you have this son that is a knucklehead that wanted to go create this thing called Esusu, which she's just like, "What's going on with you?" But like I said earlier, I believe in this concept of falling forward. My co-founder and I, Simia, never wanted to ask ourselves, what if? Esusu was 3 years in the making before we decided to quit our jobs in corporate America. And when we did that, you know, when we raised that round of financing, I called my mom, said, "Mom, Esusu just raised $130 million and the company is valued at $1 billion. Do you know what my mother said? My mother said, "Oh, that's great, but how's the wedding planning going?" I'm just like, she doesn't get it. Well, my mom keeps me grounded. She still doesn't understand what this billion-dollar company is all about. She's still a renter and uses our service and complains every time and says, "I didn't get that a lot from the Esusu people." I'm like, "Esusu people, it's your son and a bunch of other people." But you know, that's the simplicity of my mother and hundreds of millions of Americans out there. We sort of get fixated on what's going on in the macroeconomic landscape. Some people are just trying to keep a roof over their heads.
Okay, let's go there for a moment. I want to just talk about your mother for another 45 minutes, but talk to us about the macroeconomy, about, you become $1 billion company at the same time that everyone is hand-wringing, worrying about access to capital, worrying about how particularly financially focused businesses can survive. What do you make of it?
So let's go down memory lane. I'm a student of macroeconomics. The last time we had such high inflation at this rate was in the 70s under Paul Volcker. The inflationary numbers we have right now is just is not sustainable. Fed funds rate is going to make it very, very difficult for companies to refinance their debt. And when you think about mortgages also, especially for folks that have interest-only mortgages, it makes life incredibly difficult. So to that end, the difference about this macroeconomic landscape we have in front of us is corporate balance sheets are strong. You talk about that reporting every time, but households are going to suffer. I don't know if you've seen the chart. Savings have essentially dwindled and credit card debt has grown at a 15-year high. So what is going to happen? The corporates will survive. We're going to start having, hopefully, strong tailwinds at the twilight of this year. But what we're not talking about is the long era and protracted pain that households will have, especially Black, Latino households. What is going to happen to them? What is going to happen to their mortgages? How are they going to keep a roof over their heads? Those are the things that we're not covering, and we see that in our data. New York City reported one of the worst rent collection in its history.
What does that mean for your customers?
Well, it's a strong tailwind for us because what we do at Esusu is help you report rental data, and if people can afford to pay rent, give them zero interest loans. So you have win for the landlord, win for the renter, and win for society at large. So it's been a great tailwind for us. We've expanded to over 3.5 million rental units in the United States, working across all the states in this union. But I don't really care about Esusu's success alone. I am a justice capitalist. I care about the family in Fargo, North Dakota, that their farm is going to shut off because they can't afford basics, and it's very, very difficult for them to finance their debt. I care about the family in Iowa that can keep a roof over their head because things have gotten incredibly expensive. I care about the family in St. Louis, Missouri, that's trying to figure things out and don't know how they're going to essentially send their kids to school. Those are the stories of the people we need to talk about.
Yeah.
The corporates will come and go, but we need to talk about everyday people.
Who else cares about that enough to remain committed to it with you?
I think it's incumbent on us for us to have policymakers.
Do they? Are they listening to you? Are you able to take your message to them?
Yeah, and I have to give kudos to Congress and different states. I'll give you an example. The issue of reporting on-time rental data is probably one of the most bipartisan issues in Congress today. I testified in the Financial Services Committee, and it was so beautiful seeing Republicans and Democrats, both sides of the aisle, talking about and finally agreeing on something. When we look at the state of California, Senator Mark Bradford passed the legislation saying rent reporting should be standard, unanimous support in the Senate. And now we have pickup in places like Colorado. The state of Pennsylvania called us to start thinking about policy. The Federal Housing Finance Agency that controls Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, their director there is really excited about what we're doing. Sometimes we give up on our government. Sometimes we get, frustrated by the status quo, but there are smart people in those institutions, and we got to give them a fighting chance.
So are you optimistic that your focus on these families, in the short term, pain is to be had, but longer term, this wealth gap that you're so focused on, will it start to shrink?
I believe so. I'm an optimist, after all. Only in this country is my story possible. A kid that came from the slums of Lagos, Nigeria, able to build $1 billion company.
But you're still too few. Like when I'm looking at the data, it's still disgusting, to be perfectly frank. People of color, ability to raise VC money, hardly any. Women of color, next to 0.2%.
Right.
Is that narrative changing? Because I'm hearing time and time again, as I'm talking about it with VCs and people raising money, they're worried that as times get harder, people go back to their previous recognized patterns, which is unfortunately not lending to people that don't look like them, aren't in their networks.
Absolutely. I think in a society, we show our true characters when things get tough. In the Goldilocks era of George Floyd, when we had so much liquidity, everyone was talking about all the great initiatives they were going to do.
Yeah.
You know, and now things got tough. You know, inflation is taking over. We're in a very, very, contracted period right now. We've seen institutions and states even coming out and saying, what's this thing called ESG? Financing for Black VCs and entrepreneurs essentially shrank by 52%. We need to start thinking about, and then off a base of 0.2%.
Yeah.
So this is abysmal, right? And we as a society needs to start measuring what matters. We measure, you cover earnings, right? We look at EBITDA performance, we look at multiples on companies' performance. If you're really, really serious, let's talk about how many Black entrepreneurs or Latino entrepreneurs or other people of color we funded. Let's talk about how we're actually bridging the racial wealth gap, not with rhetoric, not with flimsy promises, but with real record. And there are lots of opportunities to make that happen.
It's an interesting turn of phrase you used, the Goldilocks era of George Floyd. I mean, there was obviously the free money, but the rampant pain and the recognition and humbling of so many people in the US. How did you, as a leader of your business, respond to that, feel? How did you enunciate it? Because boy, did we find companies and those Fortune 500 CEOs at a complete loss for words initially.
George Floyd was particularly hard for me because it was in Minnesota. That's where I started my journey in the United States. Where George Floyd was murdered was less than probably like a mile away from where I learned how to drive in the United States. I remember that junction. I go around that gas station. My friend Cornell takes me around, Liberian immigrants and show me how to drive, messing up. And when that hit, George Floyd could have been me. There's just another Black man in this country that we watched and life got sucked out of him right in front of us. And we had to live with that trauma and watch it over and over and over again. We can do better as a nation. We can really, really do better.
But we all thought, we hoped, we prayed, we saw that, as you said, the turns of phrase, the promises, the money, the endowments. Are we doing better? Because, I look across to what's happening in Memphis, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's much better.
Yeah, look, I'm a forever optimist. Sometimes the things that happen in this country is suffocating. I still believe that America is the greatest nation on the surface of the earth, because only in this country is my story possible. And you have a lot of people that have suffered, but still against all odds, continue to move the frontiers of what's possible in this country forward. And I strongly believe that hopelessness is the enemy of progress. And for us to really achieve what the founding fathers talked about in America, to create this idea of a more perfect union, we can never be hopeful. I know it's frustrating. I know sometimes it feels as though we take 10 steps forward and 20 steps backward, but we gotta be hopeful.
Who else are you helping build alongside? Who else are you seeing, either immigrants or people of color, women, minorities, people who've previously been, underthought of, but misjudged? Who's building out there at the moment that we can be optimistic about?
There's a lot of people. One person that comes to mind for me is Tokwe Awotona of Calendly. Has a very remarkable story as an immigrant also. You have Am from Cheaper Cash. These folks have built multi-billion-dollar businesses, and I learn from them. We chat every day. But someone that has had a profound impact in my life. As I go through this lonely journey, my co-founder, Samir, also, one person that I have the utmost respect for, that has grew up from humble backgrounds, has also done things that no one can imagine, is Melody Upson.
Let's talk about Melody for a moment. Of course, many will know her from Ariel Investments. Many will know her from the boards that she now sits on. Did you have her as a network? Is she someone that you can call up? You used that turn of phrase, lonely. And I hear that time and time again, not just from founding CEOs, but Amex CEO will say it's a lonely, lonely job at the top. So who are you? Is it Melody that you call up? Is she introducing to other people? Who do you get your guidance from?
Look, during this journey, everything looks glittery, right? JFK once says, victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat has none. There are dark days during this journey. There are hopeless days during this journey. Just because you raise $100+ million doesn't mean that there are some times whereby what you're doing doesn't feel suffocating. And I have the privilege of having the opportunity to call people like Melody and sometimes just cry to her, and just say, like, this is what I'm going through. It's a lonely journey, and people like that can see me, but they just want to help. She doesn't need anything from me. She just wants to help and listen and give the advice. Thinking about where she grew up from and what she's been able to accomplish is incredibly remarkable. And the ability to call her, one of my favorite quotes that she always tells me is just, I want to show you excellence that you can't unsee. And our work ethic, waking up every morning when we walk out together, she destroys me on the, at the gym, but she's just someone that I have the utmost respect for, look up to, an incredible business person. And when I see people like that, and you ask me to give up on this idea called America, when I see people like that with their work ethic that fight day in, day out for over 30 years of their life and moving the needle, and you expect me to give up? No, the work is just getting started.
When I look out at this audience, there's a lot of people who want to build business. They want to make impact. They want to follow your lead. But to them, a network, Melody Hobson, feels like a million miles away. What are the building blocks to getting there, to that first relationship you built with a professor? How do we get to that stage that you're now at?
I think you have to be curious. I think in our communities, we are scared to ask for help. We're scared to just reach out and say, look, I'm struggling. And you never know what others are going through also. And there are a lot of people that just want to help.
So be vulnerable.
Be vulnerable. It's okay to cry,
yes.
right? It is okay to say, you know what, I don't have it figured out. That's okay. And you need to surround yourself with a community. The real concept of Esusu in Yoruba, West Africa, is if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, we fundamentally need to go together. In Yoruba, we always say, Ile Latin Keshorode, charity begins at home, right? And you got to ask for help. That's how you become successful.
When have you wished you'd asked for help and you haven't? Has that ever been a case?
Yes. I think going through that journey of raising capital and getting that 326 no's, sometimes you ask yourself, am I enough? Despite walked with the smartest people in the world at places like Goldman Sachs or PricewaterhouseCoopers, if you worked on the most complex deals, then you see other folks that haven't done as much raise a lot of capital. It causes self-doubt sometimes. I wish I had the network I had then to ask for help, but I didn't. But there's value in going through that pain. There's value going through those dark days. There's value going through, am I going to ever make it? There's value, just thinking through, this thing could fail, and that's okay.
I'm going to ask you an emotive and a difficult one maybe, but when you looked at those other people raising a lot of money, were they white? And did you think, it's my color that's the hard thing here?
They were predominantly white, and sometimes those thoughts come to, you can't avoid it, right? Because the statistics are there. People that look like me got 0.2% in venture capital backing, and others, 98+% got funded. Sometimes you ask, is it the color of my skin? But that didn't stop us, right? We knew we had an idea that was going to outperform, create impact. At Esusu, what we've been able to do, if we're really serious about impact in society, right? When I think about what we've been able to achieve, we built a $1 billion business. It didn't stop there. Over 60% of our leadership team are women.
Yes.
86% are people of color on the leadership team. Our vendors, I'm not talking about administrative staff that serve food, real professional services, right? Not that fake counting, right? Over 50% of them are women. And we have a big diversity issue at Esusu. I want each and every one of you to help us solve. We really have a big issue of recruiting white men. So if you really want to help me address this pipeline issue, recruit all the white men to come work with us, because we're really struggling with it at Esusu.
That, you make us laugh, you give us that feel-good factor that we need in a very difficult topic. What made it different? What did you set out purposefully to say, I can understand maybe you and your co-founder showing that, if I'm an immigrant, I'm going to be included, but I might not automatically have thought that as a woman, there's a space for me. Were you just like, we have to ensure that the people we're interviewing, the bench is so large? How did you purposely go out there? Because it doesn't just happen naturally.
Yeah, we were intentional. We believed on this idea that diversity outperforms. That is the idea of America.
That's why you need some white men, because it's not diverse.
Exactly, that's why we're struggling, and we really need your help. It's a real big pipeline issue. We know that when you bring a diverse group of people from different walks of life, there's a high likelihood, and America is a great case study, that you're going to succeed, right? And what we did was be intentional from the jump. We measure what matters. We talk to our team. What are your diversity numbers? What's the makeup of men, women? And we talk to our board members about that. It's not only on the leadership team, our board is also incredibly diverse. Our cap table, the people that took a bet on us, 76% of them are people of color and women. Those people that took a bet on us, when 326 people said no, the early ones, imagine folks that invested in Esusu when Esusu was $5 million. Some of them are in the room here. Imagine those that invested in us when we were $10, $15 million. We've returned a lot of companies' funds back, sometimes 19-fold. When some of these investors invested in us, some of them had over $100 million, all of them combined, just north of $100 million under management. Now combined, they have north of $1.3 billion under management. Because when there are more Esusus, when you say a company founded by people of color can reach $1 billion, now it's not just a unicorn case. I want it to be the status quo.
What are you saying to your partners? Because you can dictate your vendors, and all power to you and credit for doing that. You can ensure that your pipeline, but initially it was, I'm sure, through a connection of people wanting to give money to you, that they saw something in you, and let's face it, a lot of the reason we need more black and brown VCs and more women VCs is because they're more likely to write checks to people who are black and brown and female.
Precisely.
What about the partners that you're talking to, some of the people who manage the real estate, are you asking questions of them? Are they reflecting on your success and thinking, I need some of his network in my life?
There are actually stories untold in this particular realm. I'll give you a story of a gentleman named Jeff Brodsky, NYU alum, sorry, Cornell. Jeff Brodsky works at Related Companies, one of the largest owners of real estate in New York City. When we walked into his office, you know what he told us? He told my co-founder and I, Samir, that what you're working on needs a lot of work. But here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that you need to do. Get the best industry security, publicly traded proof, because if I'm going to give you my data, my reputation is on the line. Get renters engaged. Get them an opportunity to keep a roof over their heads. Make sure you can essentially build trust with them and drive impact. And we said, we're going to get those things done. 6 months later, we checked off the list, and a company that owns 75,000 units of real estate gave us a shot. And that led to Goldman Sachs, that led to Freddie Mac, that led to Fannie Mae, and that led to Esusu being the largest owner and operator in the United States. So I don't want to bastardize the facts that there are not good people out there. There are good white folks out there that are willing to give us a fighting chance. Like I said, sometimes you have to ask for help. Sometimes you got to take feedback. Check off the list and come back and say, I've done what you asked us to do. And Jeff Brodsky, I Related, is a great example of that.
I love, you said you take feedback. Second, you said, what do you need to be in this sort of environment? And you said you needed to be inquisitive, like you needed to be someone who asks questions. And I think so often the people that lack the most are people in a room who aren't there willing to just ask some questions of people, because everyone is interesting, no matter who you are, what you're up to. How did you always keep that in mind? I've got to ask questions. I've got to be interested in everyone.
You know, I have nothing to lose, and my wife calls me a 13-year-old American. You know, I just show up and say, oh, what is that? You know, like I'm very oblivious.
But is that because you're also confident in your own intelligence, that you're not scared to ask what, quote unquote, is a dumb question?
My mother taught me and said, every morning when we wake up, you're enough. It's very simple. I am enough. And I am the embodiment of infinite possibilities. Even if I don't have money, I still know what I'm made of.
Capitalism does not drive us to think that we're enough. Society is built on making us feel like we're not enough. Social media plays into that fact. How other than at day one, having a mother who is smart, clever, insightful enough to have told that to their child, do we get through that? How do you tell your team now, who might not have been driven by that from a young age, that they're enough?
I think you have to live your life like you have nothing to lose. Each and every one of us in life, one thing is guaranteed. At least would expire one day on this construct called Earth. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to ask myself, what if, on my deathbed? What if you took that big leap and started that business? What if you decide to go on that vacation and work with your partner to make something happen? What if you took a chance on having a kid? What if you want to go to the continent of Africa and explore the road less traveled? Look, we're all going to die. That's guaranteed. At least would expire. But have you accomplished what you were created to do on this thing called Earth? And if you're still pondering about those ideas and asking yourself those questions, take a leap of faith, because you have nothing to lose. Money will go away. My mother always tells me, or my grandmother always says it also, vanity upon vanity. You come naked, you're either going to be cremated or eaten by termites. So have impact in this world.
How did you decide that Esusu, because you went from trying to solve water issues to trying to solve sort of allocation of capital to then the wealth divide. How did you decide that was your purpose?
Look, I have always lived my life with this construct and this idea that businesses can actually have a profound impact in society, right? And I've always believed that, at least from my vantage point, I have a head for business and a heart for the world. Nice. And everything I have done throughout my life, from providing access to water for over 250,000 people in 7 countries, from mapping international dollars on the African continent, because everyone thinks about the African continent as this aid-ridden continent, but we want to foster collaboration. Or when we created Esusu, Samia and I, and the rest of the team, thinking about how can we keep a roof over people's heads? How can we make sure you're not seen as guilty until proven innocent? Because that's what the credit score does.
Yeah.
You see immigrants come to this country, and because they don't have the 3-digit number, you're like, you're not credit worthy, we're not going to give you capital. It's always about this idea of giving people a fighting chance, because no one wants an handout. We all just want a chance to show what we're capable of. But in this country, sometimes that's far-fetched, and that's what gets us up at night. I don't get excited by the $130 million or $145 million we've raised since Esusu's inception. I don't get excited by the fact that we grew by 300% last year. I get excited, and in my all-ends call every month, we talk about the fact that, look, someone just picked up the keys to their home because we helped them establish or build their credit scores. We just kept the roof over tens of thousands of people's heads, and they were not evicted during the pandemic. There was a gentleman called Scott Falk in New York City that was on the brink of eviction. A plumber lost his job because there was nothing to do during COVID. Reached out to us hopeless because he heard us on local news. We called Scott and paid for 3 months of his rent. 2 months later, Scott called us, and my co-founder and I, Samir, were crying because Scott said, I don't know what would have happened to me, but you gave me an opportunity and I have a job that's paying me over $120,000.
Wow.
That's what America is all about.
But, okay, so we've got 5 minutes before we're going to open it up to the audience, so please get your thinking caps on and all the questions I'm sure that are going to come pouring through. America gives you that chance, but I'm starting to talk to more and more people about the worry that certain regulations, certain ways in which M&A is being pushed back on, certain, let's even say in the world of crypto, yes, it needs to have rules of the road, but it's happening in enforcement is the new regulation. Is there a worry that people are not going to see the US as that?
I think there's strength in numbers and there's strength in our diversity. This country just attracts the story this country tells to the world of this idea of creating a more perfect union. This idea that if you work hard, play by the rules, that you can get ahead. But that's not true for a lot of people. It's not true for the African American communities that have built this country, but still today, the average white family has 10 times as much wealth than the average black family. It's not true for the Latinos. They have 12 times less wealth than the average white family. So when we think about what's going on, what I encourage us to do, and that's what we did at Esusu from a pedigree standpoint, is we went to policymakers and said, look, what we are doing, the only thing we're going to plead initially is to plead the Hippocratic rule, do no harm. When we report rental data at Esusu, we report no negative data. So as you're thinking about innovative ideas, don't wait for the SEC to struck down your innovative idea. Don't wait for Congress, to say things aren't working. Don't wait for the FTC to say this M&A won't work, right? Be proactive and just say, look, these are some of the ideas we have. These are the theses we have in mind, and this is how it's accretive to this country. At Esusu, we're very, very clear. If people establish their credit scores, there are 45 million people in this country that don't have a credit score or have a thin file. The average debt in America is over $92,000. If you do that math and unlock that capital, and people can get access to that $92,000, you can unlock close to $4 trillion in capital. That's not only good for the US GDP, right? It's good for, the policymakers whereby their constituents would also have the opportunity to build wealth and probably vote for them again. So we got to go back to what I call the Badakian days, Eugene Badak, Policy 101. If you want to make sure things work, you got to get a village to get onboarded with it. It's not the wild, wild west. You don't build it and break things and come back and ask for forgiveness. You go to policymakers and say, I'm interested in pleading the Hippocratic rule. I'm not going to do no harm to the best of my abilities and control for that. And be justice capitalist and say, we're going to do good, make money, and we all win.
Anyone you're speaking to looking to leave, to build their company, not do it here?
At Esusu?
No. More the founders you speak to, the people who are worried that their pleading that they'll do no harm will still mean that this isn't the right regulatory landscape to build in.
Yeah, there are lots of, unfortunately, I think the policy landscape we find ourselves in is a little bit reactive, not proactive. When you think about places like Singapore, they created a regulatory sandbox for people to come up with the best ideas. And then you vet those ideas and think about how they scale. When the United States is a little bit reactive, we let entrepreneurs sort of create ideas and then we sort of penalize them. But the truth is always in the middle somewhere, right? Policymakers have their ideas. Regulators' job is to protect us. What we need to do is create a confluence, right? An understanding that, look, this idea is going to create a win-win outcome, and it's in our best interest to accommodate these ideas. But there's this conflict. It's like the renter and the landlord, right? The renter is like, you just take rent from me every month. What do you do for me? And there's just this friction. But if you turn around and say, look, yes, I collect rent from you every month, but if we have Esusu in the building, if you fall behind, you can get a zero-interest rent relief. You can build your credit score. We can engage you and think about other ideas to help you. It applies to policy making. It applies to entrepreneurship. We just need to talk to each other. It's one of the reasons why our country today is very polarizing. People in Minnesota don't talk to people in New York, right? Well, people in upstate New York probably hunt. They go deer hunting like me also, right? How many of us, raise your hand if you know anyone from South Dakota. Points made. We have 3 people that know people from South Dakota in this room. we need to talk to each other more.
We need to build bridges, take down barriers. We can do that by listening. We can do that by asking questions. We can do that by being interested. I know a lot of you are interested. Who's got a question? Yes, immediately.
Hi, I'm Toby, founder and CEO of Dental Find. We help people shop for dental care online. Also Nigerian and Yoruba, so represent. You mentioned that difficult conversation you had with your mom where you were quitting PwC and she was just like, what, we made it, like, and, years later you're like, oh, look, we're unicorn now and this is our valuation. She's like, okay, well, I'm still not getting these alerts or whatever. So I'm just curious, in that moment, I'm not sure how many years elapsed. That's the first question, how long was it between having that conversation and then having in your mind what you eventually, I guess, maybe saw was more legitimate success than working at PwC? And then, how did you feel during that transition period? What was her reaction in terms of to her? She's like, I think the words you used is, you're a knucklehead. So it's can you just maybe double click and walk us through how you dealt with that as a founder? Because it's your biggest cheerleader, right? She instilled all this in you about belief and your worth, and all of a sudden it's you have to tell that person that you're not done and you're not paying their rent anymore. I think it was her rent, I think.
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic question, and really excited about your venture. I took the playbook from my mother's playbook. This was the woman that sacrificed 60% of her salary. I didn't start watching television till I was 7 years old because we couldn't afford. Folks that live in Nigeria knows what NEPA is all about. We don't have constant electricity in Nigeria like you do in America. So my mother didn't pay the electric bill so I could go to school. So when she asked me and we're having the conversation, I'm like, you made a lot of sacrifices and I just want to give this a try. That's what you've always done. You have less than an high school degree, but you just believed in this idea that this thing called education will work. So why settle for PwC? Why not do something bigger? She cried, she didn't disagree with it, and said, you're your father's son. When you do something right in Nigerian parents will be like, oh, that's my real son, if you do something wrong. And now when I was making this choice, they're like, your father died when you were 2, you're just your father's son, you do whatever you want to do. And I did what I wanted to do, but it's still funny because she still doesn't understand the might of the company. But she knows now she doesn't have to worry about rent. She knows now that she can call. And she still treats me like I'm that little kid because she doesn't understand what $1 billion company is all about. And she can't comprehend $145 million. And the only time my mother said she was proud of me was when I testified at the US Congress. She texted me, I just watched it, the US, I'm proud of you. I'm like, well, when we raised $145 million, you're asking me about the wedding. Very, 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 very pointless. But I just used my mother's courage. I think that's where I got it from. She gave everything not knowing the might of education. And I gave everything not knowing what Esusu was going to amount to. And my co-founder, Samir, we fell forward. We didn't have money to rest on. We don't have a trust fund. We fell forward. And the universe rewarded us. And we stand on the shoulders of many people that have counseled us, advised us, were here before, and invested in us. And we take those things serious.
Well said.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bertha Fertil. I love the fact that you call it Esusu. And so across the universe that Black people live, they understand what that means, and they understand the sharing of that. The question that I have is, how do you let others know about this system so that other people can benefit from this?
Right.
For example, I know you know people in Minnesota and the people here in New York, but what about Miami, where you have predominantly Haitians or Cubans and such? How do you spread the information so that folks know what's happening?
That's a very, very thoughtful question, and you're right. Susu is sort of code word for folks that when you know, you know. So, and people are like, "Oh, Susu," and you're like, "Huh?" It's like, it's like this thing when black people see each other and they're like, you see yourself at Goldman Sachs or PwC, you don't know each other, you're like, "How are you doing?" And that's what Susu is supposed to be. It's like this unspoken code word for people of color. People do it in India, people do it in the Caribbean, people do it on the African continent. And people do it in Eastern Europe, right? It's the oldest form of banking in the world, but it's built on this concept of community. It's built on this concept that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. So to your question, though, we have a unique go-to-market strategy, which is to go one to many. We partner with the largest owners and operators of real estate and, have engagements with folks like institutions like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And that has helped us be now the largest player of this reports and data across the country. Phase 2 of what we're doing at Esusu is now to say, look, we've helped people establish financial identity. How do we then help them build wealth? And that's where the direct-to-consumer comes into play. But we have a strong business-to-business sort of engine that is essentially generating revenue at a strong gross margin and strong EBITDA performance. Then we can leverage all that base to then go ahead and build a direct-to-consumer platform whereby everyone in the United States knows what we're doing. It's the same sort of playbook Amazon leveraged, right? Do you want to build a forest or do you want to build a tree? We like the forest approach, and that's how we build the groundswell to go direct-to-consumer. So the answer to your question is stay tuned. You're going to see Esusu everywhere. But, my mother always taught me you need to build you can't build a mansion on a sinking sand. You need to build it on a solid foundation. So we're finalizing the foundation right now, and you're going to start seeing Esusu everywhere shortly.
Hi, my name is Ethan Fertiel, and my question to you is, how do I, as a young black man, build my credit?
Wow, it's a fantastic question. Well, I spend a lot of my time thinking about credits. There are lots of ways that you can build credits. There are great companies out there. When your mom or family members give you money, or when you do chores, there are companies out there that can take that data, right, and report that data for you into the consumer rating agencies. When you save, there are companies out there that can essentially help you transform that data and report into the consumer rating agencies. One day when you go to college, right, you're going to have the opportunity to use Esusu, and hopefully you get a great degree in one hand and a fantastic credit score on the other hand, because we work in college campuses also. So there's ample opportunities for you to build credit. Savings is one. There are a bunch of companies out there, and I can talk to you about them, sequel to this conversation. And then hopefully one day when you go to college, you can get Esusu for free, and leverage our services. I'm sure we're going to be in the institution you elect to go.
Good question. Anyone else with a question? We've got time for one more. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I'm a fellow African and hopefully future founder. One question.
Ethiopian or Eritrean?
Somali.
Somali. Oh, yeah, close. East Africa still.
If you know, you know.
Yeah.
So one question that, one thing that a lot of founders say is hiring early stage is really important. So I'm just kind of curious, what were the most important influential hires? How did you go about it? What are the most important hires you had early on? And what are the most difficult problems, business and technical problems you had to solve at that stage?
Well, that's a deep question. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not going to give you rubbish answers. We struggled at first because we were trying to raise money and we couldn't afford the best of the best. And there's this saying, you get what you pay for. Earlier on, we hired people and it didn't work out multiple times. And that's okay. It's part of the process. Those things teach you and you build muscle to recognize the folks that essentially work out. But the best sort of partnership decision I ever made in my life was my co-founder, Samir. I think Samir is my brother, is my best friend. We've been in the foxhole together. felt as though the world is going to come to an end. So as you think about creating businesses, your co-founder, your business partner is probably the most important decision you would ever make. Samia and I have had $100,000 in credit card debts together. We've looked at each other and said, after the 326 no's, like, what the heck are we doing? We got kicked out of a Denny's together, right, for crying out loud, right? And, you know, he was my best man last year when I got married, and I was his best man, you know, last year when he got married, and we're there for each other. Like I said earlier, the journey is lonely, and you need someone that will be there with you in the foxhole, someone you can depend on. And I'm fortunate in my work husband, Samir. We've been through it together. And
How about your wife?
my wife is the most important thing that ever happened to me. You know, people call me Taylor's husband, and I'm really proud of that. My wife, if you think anything of me, quadruple it. My wife is arguably one of the most impressive people you ever find, and she's my rock. She keeps me grounded, and the most special human being I ever came across in my entire life. My mother is jealous because she thought.
Beautiful. I think that's quite a nice way to end it. What an incredible discussion. I can't thank you enough for time that I get to spend with you today, but the fact that we've got to share it, I think you've gone and energized most people. We've got some limited time, folks. Go and spend it wisely. Go and spend it here with a few drinks, a snack. Maybe get a chance to ask Wemimo a few more questions, but please do give it up for one legendary founder.
Thank you so much.